Samsung Galaxy S. One of the most popular names in the world of smartphones and has been for years. Interestingly, it's kind of a long name. You might be wondering where Galaxy S comes from. And if you think you already know, what you're thinking is probably wrong. Apparently, Galaxy comes from a wine often enjoyed by high-level Samsung executives, and then they proceeded to name like 20,000 phones after it. Now, here's the thing. Samsung will try anything. That's kind of their thing. Like, this is something I've known about them for a long time from reviewing their phones, but just from researching for this video, like, they have a ton of phones in every single imaginable price bracket or feature set or spec sheet. Here, you can even try to guess these. They've had a Samsung Galaxy F series. What do you think the F stands for? It stands for fun. Then there's the Galaxy Z series, Z for zero, and Galaxy M is, you'd think mid-range, but it actually stands for millennial. And then Galaxy A, that's some of their most popular affordable smartphones, so naturally it stands for alpha. There's Galaxy W for wonder, Galaxy R for royal, the list goes on. But then the flagship that's lived at the top of their lineup is the Samsung Galaxy S. And S stands for super smart. Yeah, super smart. Anyway, the first ever Samsung Galaxy S comes out in 2010. Just to set the scene, like, this is 3 years after the first ever iPhones come out. So the iPhone 4 is about to come out. This is a couple months after the Nexus 1 gets unveiled. BlackBerry is quaking in their boots. Like, the entire smartphone industry, if you want to call it that, is totally in a reshuffling. Things are up for grabs. And it's still very much in its infancy too. The second most popular phone selling by volume looks like this. It's a Nokia 3720 Classic. And so Samsung launches the first ever Galaxy S, super smart, into the world with over 24 variations. This is going to be a bit of a theme here. You know, it was a pretty basic phone. Big touchscreen on the front, some capacitive buttons, a plastic removable back, a single camera. Today, we have Samsung Galaxy S24 and its ultra-refined, tightly packed supercomputer in the palm of your hands with high-resolution cameras and displays, powerful processors, AI features, like just a ton of optimizations that have stacked up over the years to get to this point. So today, I've got every single Samsung Galaxy S that has ever been released. They're all in front of me. Actually, it's every main Galaxy S variant from the S1 to the S24, everything in between, and I'm gonna review them all. And some of them I've reviewed before, and others are like the first time I've ever gotten them working on camera, but either way, it'll be fun to go back and go through. This is the story of how we got to where we are today and where it started. So buckle up. We're gonna jump right in. Also, stay tuned for the graphs at the end. Like usual, they're super fun. So, Samsung Galaxy S. This is the first one, summer 2010. And yeah, it does clearly look old with the classic 4 capacitive buttons at the bottom, Android 2.1, and it's a micro USB port at the top next to the headphone jack. But I feel like right off the bat, you can see Samsung differentiating itself here. First of all, this is a reasonable display. This is a 4-inch screen, and it's a Samsung-made AMOLED display. So that's a huge deal. Back in these days, you could see a meaningful difference in battery life just if you set a wallpaper with a bunch of black in it, because the pixels didn't have to light up on the OLED, and that was a new concept back then. It's also only a 1500 milliamp hour battery, so every bit of savings you can get means a lot. Also, of course, this was back in the day when you could just pop the back off any phone and just take the battery out, swap it out at any moment, have 2 batteries if you want to, swap them in and out real quick while the others are charging. We will witness the death of this feature during this video. But then using this phone now, like, okay, it feels slow, obviously, but it's not really in the laggy or unresponsive way. It's just slow. Like, there's a lot of solid waiting for anything to happen, especially heavier stuff like the web browser or opening the camera. You just have to slow down a little bit, give it a second. Even though this launched with what at the time was the fastest graphics processing of any smartphone, thanks to a Samsung-made chip inside. Oh, and speaking of cameras, it launched with a single 5 megapixel camera on the back, which was capable of shooting actually 720p video right out the box. It asks for a memory card to do a lot of things like shooting videos because it only comes with 2 or 4 gigs of storage out the box, but there's a micro SD card expandable storage slot in the back of the phone, so you could go right up to 32 gigs right off the bat. So I never used one of these phones, but my favorite thing about it now is it's kind of got the modern shape already. It has like kind of flat sides and a flat back. There is no camera bump. There is a small bump in the plastic actually over the rear facing speaker because it was common to put your phone down on a table or something, and without that bump, it would block the speaker. And so that bump literally is just to keep the speaker open so you can always hear your sound. Now, you remember how I was saying Samsung will kind of just try anything? That's been true since the first one. Like this first ever Galaxy S launched with, like I said, over a dozen variants. And so you might recognize this one as the Samsung Galaxy S Stratosphere. And you can tell because this is the one with the little Verizon stamp on its forehead here. But you might have had the Samsung Galaxy S Vibrant. That's what it would be called if you got the variant that was made for T-Mobile. Or the Samsung Galaxy S Epic 4G, which is what they call the one that launched on Sprint. Now, in hindsight, honestly, it feels like this was Samsung's way of just getting around carrier exclusives, because they basically just made a slightly different version of this phone for every carrier in America with a little bit of a different design and a little bit of different features. Only Samsung. Only Samsung. Little did they know this would be the beginning of a whole empire. So the sequel. The first sequel is the Samsung Galaxy S2. Second gen can teach you a lot. So right away, a couple things. This phone is notably bigger and noticeably sleeker than the first Galaxy S. And these were back in the days where the percentage increases year over year with some of the stuff they did was crazy on paper. Like this went from a 1 gigahertz chip to a 1.2 gigahertz dual core chip. So that just more than doubled the processing power. It also went from a 4-inch screen to a 4.3-inch screen. It goes from a 5 megapixel 720p camera to an 8 megapixel camera on the back shooting 1080p. It doubled the RAM up to a gigabyte. It bumped up to a 1650 milliamp hour battery. And the amount of base storage, I guess you would say octupled from 2 gigs all the way up to 16. And it did all that in a phone that got thinner. And it also added NFC, so it added pieces, and now this is an 8.5 millimeter phone. So this is one of the thinnest phones in the world at the time that it came out. Now the starting price also did go up a lot, from $399 to $549. But this phone did launch into a relative success. This sold like 3 million units in the first 2 months. This was definitely the first one to show up on my radar. I never owned one of these phones, but I definitely saw it and thought about it. But then this next one, the Galaxy S3 in 2012, this is the first Samsung Galaxy S that I actually owned. And I remember loving this thing. I remember it well too. The jump up in size again was very real, so it's all the way up to a 4.8-inch phone now, which, believe it or not, like this is starting to push the limits of what people considered an appropriate phone size. Because I remember around this time, there were a lot of phones that were hitting exactly 4.65 inches. Like that was a popular phone screen size for the big phones at the time. And anything near 5 inches kind of felt like weird, like a tablet size. And here's Samsung's flagship pushing 4.8 inches of screen. And then the 4 capacitive buttons down at the front are now just 3 buttons. The search button's gone, so it's a home button that's a physical button with back button on the right and menu on the left. And this is also the first time we got a voice assistant on the phone. And they called it S-Voice. Clever, I know. This is a pretty direct response to, we just got Siri announced on the iPhone the year before, but you know, S-Voice, S for Samsung. They also use S for a bunch of other stuff, S-Notes. So Samsung Voice, S-Voice. Now, S-Voice wasn't good, but then again, neither were any of the other voice assistants that were coming out. So this is mostly just people poking around, asking it to do things, random facts, just weather, things like that. What turned out to be much more significant with this phone is just this super sleek design. The whole thing is shaped like a thin pebble that you could probably skip across a lake. It's inspired by nature. The whole OS leaned into that. It had a ton of water droplet sounds everywhere. The lock screen went from swipe to unlock to dragging your finger through this water. Like, it was a pretty strong theme for them. But I remember using this phone and reviewing it. This was back in college for me. I loved it. It was also received very well. And the combo of like being super slim and fast and having a huge OLED and S-Voice had it starting to get touted like the iPhone killer. But I think more interestingly, they thought this phone was big enough to warrant an S3 Mini, because this is a 4.8-inch screen, like I said, kind of giant. And so they came out with the one with a 4-inch display, Galaxy S3 Mini, at the same time, because of course they did. But the next year we got Samsung Galaxy S4, which was the beginning of a lot of things. Why do I feel like the 4th generation of any major new product is like the defining one. This one's no exception. Now, of course, they're still making gigantic leaps on paper with specs because these little pocket computers are getting more and more capable of everything they do. So it goes from a 4.8-inch 720p screen to being one of the first phones with a 5-inch 1080p screen. In the age of a bunch of new Retina displays that are aiming for the best pixel density, then they also had variants all the way up from 1.4 to 1.9 gigahertz dual-core processors. It again doubled the RAM from 1 to 2 gigabytes, and that single back camera went from 8 megapixels to 13 megapixels. So this is the first time you could take 1080p videos from the camera on the Galaxy S and then watch them on the 1080p screen on the front of the Galaxy S. Pretty sick. This also goes from a 2,000 milliamp hour battery to a 2,600 milliamp hour battery. Still removable. A 30% increase is pretty crazy, but again, they just keep aiming for 1 day of battery life. That's been a theme since this long ago. Like, yes, these things get more and more powerful every year and they're doing more and more stuff, but as long as they can hit 1 day of battery life, they seem cool with that. Now, if you want more proof of Samsung just trying a ton of things, this phone had a ton of random features. Some of them actually are kind of interesting because they feel like the AI features of back in this day. So like this is the phone that tried head tracking smart scrolling. So when you're reading something, you can tilt your head forward and backward to scroll through the page. This is insane. It had smart rotation. So this is actually cool. If you have auto rotate on, but you're looking at the screen while reading something and then turn sideways, it won't rotate the screen. It'll keep it right side up. Smart pause is fun. You're watching a video, you look away from the screen, it'll automatically pause. You look back, it'll play again. So there's lots of stuff like this. Some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. Fine. But this was also partially used to justify another increase in price for this phone. So S4 at launch, I don't know if you remember this, it launched at $650. This is also the first time Samsung made an active version of the phone. So another variant. So Galaxy S4, Galaxy S4 Active. So this added IP67 certification and a more rugged design. It was a TFT LCD display instead of AMOLED, and it traded some other small downgrades for like physical buttons and a slightly thicker phone with some flaps to cover the ports. I'll tell you what was not really a major hit though. This was one of the first major incidents of a Samsung phone battery swelling, catching fire, and burning up on someone. Now it didn't go happen to a ton of people. It wasn't enough to become a major trend, but it's something to sort of remember for the future, foreshadowing. Now, by the time we get to Galaxy S5, Samsung is starting to hit their stride, I think, with the Galaxy S. Another huge battery bump. Now it's up to 2,800 milliamp hours. And another huge screen bump all the way up to 5.1 inches diagonally. And across the board, this is, I think, fully flagship in every dimension. It's a 2.7 gigahertz processor on some variants, all right? 2 to 3 gigs of RAM, up to 32 gigs of storage, and it's a 16 megapixel camera that now shoots 4K video. Also, the bottom left button has gone from a menu button to a multitasking button to match the 3 primary buttons needed to operate Android, but also says a lot about what it's capable of. But then, of course, alongside all that is the absolute classic Samsung just trying things. And I think the telltale sign for this stuff is when you see them try it for one generation, just to throw it out the wall and see what sticks, and then it's gone the next year. Like they added this little sensor back here next to the camera flash on the back. That's a heart rate sensor. So you could measure your heart rate, plugs into S-Health. That didn't last very long. They also added this weird texture for the first time to this plastic back that, made it a little softer, yes, but also totally made it look like a Band-Aid. Plus it even came in this flesh color that also didn't stick around long. They also added a fingerprint reader to the home button. Fun fact, back in these days, you actually had to swipe your whole finger across the home button to get it read. Of course, fingerprint readers have stuck around, but it doesn't have to be swiped anymore, so that's improved significantly. And you can see this weird port at the bottom here. The Galaxy S5 has a sort of a double port. Basically, it could be used as just normal micro USB for charging, but if you wanted full USB 3.0 data speeds, there was a special double-ended cable you could plug in to use all the pins and get that. Kind of weird. That didn't stick around long either. Also, there was a flap on the bottom of all of these phones for water resistance, and they were super easy to fall off. And this one also fell off. Naturally, they also released both an active and a separate sport version of this phone alongside the regular Galaxy S5. Of course they did. So Samsung Galaxy S6 came out in 2015. But truthfully, this was the beginning of a new era for Samsung phones. You can look at it and see it. This is when they entered the modern age, for better or for worse. So this phone was the first one with a fully glass back instead of plastic, which yes, made it their first non-removable back. Cue all the outrage in the comments of every YouTube video at the time, but it also added wireless charging, and they dropped these metal rails and metal buttons on the sides that felt way more solid than all the plastic we were working with on all of the flagships that came before it. And this phone is sleek. Like footprint wise, it's literally the same size as an iPhone 15 Pro from today, but turn it sideways and it's one of the slimmest phones ever, thanks to having a 2550 milliamp hour battery. Yes, that's actually smaller than the previous year. Now, this is a recipe to make enthusiasts particularly mad. When you go backwards, it's not great. So they heard that this went from a 2800 to a 2500 milliamp battery, and it's not removable anymore. And it also no longer has the micro SD card for expansion of your storage. And on top of that, you also went from that weird USB 3.0 thing down technically to USB 2.0. But aside from that, this still did feel like their first really modern piece of hardware. This is also the first time we're getting a 1440p AMOLED display. It's crazy sharp already. We haven't seen a higher resolution since then. And it's also the first Galaxy S flagship with optical image stabilization in the primary camera. So this is a really big camera upgrade, and it was the first Galaxy S flagship to use 64-bit processing. I do remember there was a lot of positive reception around this phone, obviously from being well put together in metal and glass now and having good features, and just generally being the same price as the previous year. I just feel like there was one thing holding it back, especially among us critical reviewers, from being the obvious best Android phone available at that time, and her name was TouchWiz. See, around this time, there were also some other big enthusiast Android options, like Nexus 6P and 5X, which were stock Android. And then there was HTC One M9 just down the street with their own HTC software. LG G4 was out with their own software. And so like every Android device seen at this time, when it comes out, it's like, what are the specs? What are the features? What's the design? And then what is the Android skin that you have to deal with to get it? Now, TouchWiz has gotten better over time. It's, a little less bloop nature sounds, but it's still absolutely a skin on top of Android rather than super integrated into Android itself, which can make performance feel a little slow. It can slow down how quickly updates come to this phone over time because they've got to go through Samsung, but it gives you a bunch of extra features in return. So at the time, if you watch my videos around the phones at this time, I always preferred like stock Android, OEM, just straight from Google. It's always the fastest updates and it just felt the cleanest and most coherent, where Samsung, TouchWiz just had this colorful, cartoony look to it, this feel to it. It was a little cluttered, but it had the features. It had what mattered. Anyway, with S6, they also tried a little thing called the S6 Edge and Edge Plus, because there was this war being fought at the time. Every time you saw a keynote with a new smartphone announcement, they always mentioned screen to body ratios. And so every flagship, if they can improve the best number, they would always brag about the screen to body ratio, how thin their bezels are. And the best phones at the time were hovering around 70%, meaning 70% of the front of the device is screen. And the bigger that number, the cooler the phone looks. So this S6 Edge thing came along, and it's another bit of Samsung innovation just trying some stuff, but they literally bend the OLED display right over to the edges of the phone and use curved glass to make it look like the display is like bleeding right over the edges of the device, hence the Edge name. Obviously there's still a bezel, but it kind of worked. It looked really cool. This actually came at first from when they originally tried it in the Galaxy Note, which they had it on one side of the screen, which is some like software tickers. They literally put like a stock ticker on the side of the phone. They would try anything to see if it worked. And when it did, they put it on both halves, and now it's on the Galaxy S, and it felt like the flagship thing. So this phone got up to a 76% screen to body ratio with the S6 Edge Plus. This is starting to feel like the top of the flagship lineup. Now, Galaxy S7 was kind of an incremental year in between. Holding it now, you can tell they didn't really feel the need to change too much. Like, it's the same size, same screens and resolutions, same storage sizes up to 128 gigs, and they actually brought back expandable storage by popular demand, so I guess you can talk Samsung into some stuff. And you still can't take the back off of this thing, but they went ahead and added a micro SD card slot on the SIM card tray, which is clever. But what I feel like they really realized this year is two things. One, wow, you can really shove a lot of batteries in these things. And two, the Edge is the flagship. People love the Edge. People just love the screen melting over the sides thing, so they're going to do a lot more of it. So the regular S7 was great, but the S7 Edge had a 3,000 milliamp hour battery, and the S7 Edge Plus had a 3,600 milliamp hour battery. And then the S7 Active had a 4,000 milliamp hour battery. But for reference, this is also the same year that the Galaxy Note 7 came out. So you may recall the issues that plagued the phone and its 3,500 milliamp hour battery. The exact issue, the reason why the Note 7s started blowing up and having dangerous battery problems, was specifically a design issue using a thin separator between two electrodes in a battery. It was just damaged way too easily, where wild reactions would occur when that damage happened. For as many gates as we've had for smartphones, like Bendgate, whatever, this has to be the greatest PR disaster in the history of smartphones. Like, I think by a long way. Like, this got banned on planes. Like, people would just ask, do you have a Samsung phone? Like, I don't think you want to take that on the plane. It was literally recalled worldwide. They took all of them back. They couldn't sell it anymore. It's a big issue. And honestly, a lot of tech companies would never recover from that. But Samsung, at this point, was established enough. They were big enough. They were trying enough new things that they could weather that storm, which is impressive. Then Samsung Galaxy S8. This is one of my favorite phones. They added a lot of things to this phone. Now, still classic Samsung, throwing an absolute metric ton of stuff at the wall to see what sticks. Now, I definitely didn't love all of the stuff that they tried, but I love that they were trying stuff, and they tried so many things that these phones just feel a world apart. So first of all, there was an S8 and an S8 Plus, and both have fully curved edge displays, so Samsung's realized that this advantage is received really, really well, and they can just keep touting their massive screen-to-body ratios. Plus, they've refined their Edge Screen Apps feature. It's subtle, it's out of the way, but it's useful for those who want to take advantage of it. Then they also tried this new pressure-sensitive layer underneath the display right around the home button, so the display can always respond to pressures in this area, no matter where you are, even while the screen is off. Now, this is also, as you may have guessed, right around the time that Apple was trying 3D Touch or Force Touch in the iPhone, and both of these didn't last very long, but they tried. And they also tried a slightly taller, narrower 18.5:9 aspect ratio, which actually did nicely keep the ever-growing screen size to be pretty reachable, since they've also gone from capacitive buttons below the screen to all on-screen buttons. So now talk about screen-to-body ratio, like we are really cooking. They also switched to USB-C for the first time. Sick, easy win. People were asking for that last year anyway. But then with that, they also tried this thing called DeX, which is like if you plug that USB-C port into a computer monitor, you get this whole computer UI, which just uses the phone as like a trackpad. And then you might have noticed the extra button here on the left-hand side. So fun fact, for the entire history of every single Samsung Galaxy S so far, they have always had power button on the right-hand side, volume rocker on the left-hand side. And that's still true here, but they've added a button underneath the volume rocker. And yeah, that's the Bixby button. So Bixby is the new voice assistant replacing S-Voice on Samsung phones. And Samsung really leaned in hard with this one. So not only did it get a dedicated button to activate it all the time, but the camera also now has Bixby Vision, which is kind of like an awkwardly specific competitor to Google Lens. And this is Samsung really leaning into the whole AI assistant thing for the first time, and I would say to mixed success. Then they also tried a fingerprint reader on the back of the phone this time, since there's no home button anymore. Love that. And then they also tried this plastic snap-on keyboard, which I think, honestly, might be in my top 5 worst smartphone accessories of all time. But even after all of that, I think the most important or the most impactful decision for this phone, for Galaxy S8, was their choice to use Qualcomm Snapdragon chips in some regions and Samsung's own made Exynos chips in other regions. Now, at the time, Or even in hindsight, this was a pretty smart move, maybe even ahead of their time, because this is Samsung going, all right, we want to make our own chips for our phones so that we can maximize the efficiencies and all the power and the things that we do in our phones. We want them to all be built by us. And also to not give Qualcomm so much money while we're at it. But also in hindsight, this failed spectacularly. This was like an ongoing thing they really wanted to do, but because they didn't go all Exynos right from the get-go, they split it. They had some Exynos and some Snapdragon. The Snapdragon phones would consistently and regularly outperform the Exynos version of the same phone across the board. Better performance, better efficiency, better battery, better heat. It literally got to the point where prospective buyers would jump into subreddits and forums to try to find where they could import a Qualcomm version of the phone instead of the Exynos one available in their own country. And there are a whole bunch of tutorials on if you're buying a secondhand one, how do you know which version you're getting just based on the serial number, just so you can avoid the Exynos version. Like I said, in hindsight, ahead of their time a bit here, but big backfire. Nevertheless, there was lots of other stuff that was so new about this phone, it justified another increase in price all the way up to $750. That's today's prices. So Galaxy S9. I'm gonna say this was peak Samsung Galaxy S. I loved this Galaxy S9. And again, it was Galaxy S9 and S9 Plus. Now this was a relatively incremental update versus S8, but slightly thinner bezels, same RAM, same storage, but slightly improved processor. Nice colors. I like these colors. And then they also moved that fingerprint sensor on the back from right next to the camera to right under the camera. Otherwise, you know what? Basically the same thing. But then they had to try some stuff. So this time they tried this dual aperture thing with the camera, and it was super cool. Basically, it could snap between f1.5 wide open and f2.4, a variable aperture in a smartphone. It's a clever little thing that would let you receive as much light as possible in low light situations. But when you have plenty of light, it would stop down to 2.4 and it would get more in focus. It would be a sharper, better looking photo. And I remember I loved it when I used it. Other reviewers loved it when they used it. And then it was gone from the next phone. Samsung, we miss this. Bring it back. But honestly, this is one of those phones, picking it up now, like, I've talked about this before. If you could bring back any old phone design from whatever year and just modernize it with new specs and new software, I think between HTC One M8 or M9 and this phone, pretty good candidates. This thing is sleek. It's just a great size. It's a 1440p OLED, USB Type-C. It still has a headphone jack. Obviously, the fingerprint reader is in a good spot. Just a really great overall package. And I said as much in my original review back in 2018. Now, is it still Samsung software? Yeah. But at this point, there are so many features jammed in here that it's kind of undeniable, the utility. And yeah, people are totally willing to live with it as long as you know what you're getting into with a Samsung phone. Fun fact, this is also the year that Samsung unveiled the Galaxy Home, a small Weber grill shaped speaker designed to be an AI assistant in your house with Bixby. It's been about 2,000 days since that announcement. No word on it since then. I don't think it's officially been canceled. Maybe they just want us to forget about that one. So then Samsung graduates to the Galaxy S10. This, I think, could be argued also maybe as peak Samsung, since they've now basically just gone full screen to the point where reviews are complaining about the last few millimeters of forehead and chin. Like, you see how the chin is just a tiny bit bigger? But yeah, up at the top, we've gone right up to the earpiece, and the selfie camera is now a cutout in the top right-hand corner, giving birth to a whole new genre of meme wallpapers. Screen-to-body ratio is approaching 90% now, and we're basically just looking at Samsung's best-in-class 1440p AMOLED and not much else. And now these phones have gotten irreversibly big. S10 has a 6.1-inch display, and the S10 Plus would be 6.4, borderline tablet-sized. 10 years removed from the original, but truly entering us into the modern age. This is the first Samsung phone with more than one camera on the back, and in Samsung fashion, they just jump straight to 3, obviously. So there's a primary camera, a 2x telephoto camera, and a 0.5x ultra wide. Phones would never look the same after this point. Every phone up until now so far has had just that tiny little camera bump, just a single little circle or oval on the back, but as soon as you open this box, you're never going back. Cameras are now a feature on the back of a phone. And you'll also notice there's no fingerprint reader on the back of this phone because this is also the first one that they tried that ultrasonic fingerprint reader underneath the display glass. And they pretty much nailed it right from the get-go. I remember testing it and seeing if it will work underwater and if it was scratched at all. It was fine. They haven't really improved it much since these days, so it seems like they nailed it. They still use it. But the thing that maybe brought this phone the most into the age of modern smartphones might just be the price. So Samsung's been throwing a ton of stuff at the wall for years, and now they've just built out this whole lineup. But S10 starts at $900 when it comes out. And then they have the S10 Plus, which starts at $1,000. They also had an S10 5G, which was an even bigger, even more expensive version of the phone with a bigger battery to support, 5G radios, because 5G is sort of burgeoning at this time. Expensive phones. I think that actually is why one of my favorite new releases around this time was this little new thing they made called the S10e. And this thing, it's not quite a mini, but this is where Samsung made a couple little corner-cutting decisions to separate the true flagship from something a little more budget-friendly. So for $750, it has a slightly smaller and slower charging battery and a power button fingerprint reader instead of the ultrasonic underscreen one. But honestly, probably a better deal than the flagships that it was up against. So now on to the next one, Galaxy S20. And no, we didn't skip any phones here. Basically, 2020 is the year Samsung decided that they were going to sync up the year of the calendar with the year of the phone. So we have S20 in 2020. I'm sure that has nothing to do with the fact that the number was always slightly behind the flagship iPhone. But now this Galaxy S20 looks blank. Boring, soulless. What happened? This feels like this is a complete blank phone. If you put the S10 next to the S20 and then, not to jump too far forward, but the S21, it looks like they took a year off with the S20. This might be the most generic phone of all time. Now, to be fair, there are other phones that have looked like this. And again, this is Samsung's flagship for years, and we know they're gonna start to play it safe. But in hindsight, this one is pretty dull. It also happens to be the first ever Galaxy S since the very beginning to move the volume rocker to the right side. That's a choice. It also is the first one to not say the model number on the back at all with the text. It's just blank. And it's also the first Galaxy S to follow in the footsteps of the iPhone after making fun of them and removing the headphone jack. Also a choice. Now, I do love that this was officially the first Galaxy S flagship with a 120 hertz display, and they actually moved the smaller hole punch camera to the top middle, and it was the first to be able to record 8K video, so it's still gaining capabilities. It's not like the ball didn't move forward at all with this phone, but probably the more interesting dynamic is what was happening at the very top of the lineup. See, this was the first year of the Ultra phone. So S20 is still a regular size phone, $1,000 phone, but they also decided to make a gigantic phone with the most possible numbers and the highest end possible specs and make it an Ultra. And this was kind of fighting at the top of the lineup with the Galaxy Note, because up until this point, they tried a whole bunch of stuff and they ended up having this particularly successful high-end phone with a stylus in it. That was, if you wanted even more than the S could offer, you could go buy a Galaxy Note. So this phone in this year, kind of just like its design, just kind of got forgotten until later in the year when they dropped the Fan Edition, the FE of the exact same phone, cut a couple things down, 1080p, removed one or two features, $700. And this phone was a great deal. This won my phone of the year. But also not so fun fact, this Galaxy S20 has also started swelling. The battery has started to bulge to the point where it's pushing the back of the phone off of the chassis through the glue. So I'll just say, I've had a lot of smartphones come through the studio. We review a lot of phones, obviously, and we've had basically a large sample size of smartphones in long-term storage. And the only brand that's had more than one smartphone whose battery swells up like a balloon to the point where we have to get rid of it is Samsung. But then the year was 2021, and Samsung drops Galaxy S21, definitely bringing us up to the current design language that is so recognizable as a Samsung phone. So this triple camera is now in the corner of the back. It's unmistakable now. In fact, this might be their best one, with the metal piece melting over the sides and specifically this purple and gold colorway. I think it's kind of iconic. This is also the beginning of the base models being extremely boring. I'm calling it now. Like the action's way higher and lower in the lineup. Like the Note fighting the Ultra for supremacy, that's crazy. Also the Fan Edition and the A series kind of fighting each other to be the best overall value. But sitting in the middle, kind of in no man's land, that just can't mess anything up and has to play it safe. Well, that's exactly what the S21 did. They actually bumped down to a 1080p display. They're back to flat displays now. No more expandable storage in this model. No more charger in the box for this model. Whatever the industry's doing, that's what they're doing. Like there's no leadership here. There's just enough brand cachet that like if they make a Samsung version of the phone that everyone's buying in stores and put it next to that in the store, people will just buy the Samsung one. So Galaxy S22 is more along the same track. Slightly more boring colors, slightly flatter edges all the way around. But on the upside, this thing also does basically have perfectly thin bezels all the way around at this point. So I think the screen to body ratio now is well into the 90s. And frankly, I don't even care what the number is anymore. I just feel like there's so little bezel to hold with my fingers that anything less wouldn't really make any sense. So the bezel's effectively gone. At this point, it makes perfect sense to go back to the perfectly flat displays because Samsung has now realized, and everyone else has realized, that those curved displays, they're kind of cool and they looked cool in the past, but they were kind of a crutch to make the phone appear to have a larger screen to body ratio than it actually did. But now that we have the tech to go right up to the edges and the corners, you don't have to curve the display anymore. It just looks sick and is flatter and is more durable. So actually, maybe the most notable change on the outside here is these phones are now slightly smaller than the previous year. So it went from 6.2 and 6.7 inches to 6.1 and 6.6 inches for S22 and S22 Plus. And there is no doubt in my mind that that is specifically to give more room and a bigger gap to the Ultra phone at the top of the lineup. The Ultra has been doing battle with the Note. It's winning. It stole the S Pen from it. And so with these boring default base phones for $750, flat, totally fine. Just look up there though. There's some more expensive phones. You can spend more money. So the Galaxy S23 was interesting for one reason and one reason only. No more Exynos version. So every single Galaxy S23 and Galaxy S23 Plus and S23 Ultra ships with the same slightly customized Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy. And yeah, performance is great. You know, for all the years that they've been trying to catch up the Exynos chip to the Snapdragon chip, they finally gave up on it, which you could argue is good news because everyone now gets the good Snapdragon performance and efficiency now, but it's also kind of bad news because there's less competition. There's that much less incentive for Qualcomm to do anything particularly great here. The whole goal for Exynos chips was supposed to be better customization and integration. And while we got rid of that, they can still claim with S23 to have done at least some customization because they've, like I said, they've made it a 4 Galaxy chip. So it's not quite the off-the-shelf one everyone else gets. What's different? Slightly higher clock speeds, slightly more powerful because they've got better cooling in these phones. So mission accomplished. Aside from that, they've removed even more character by getting rid of the signature camera bump and making an even more generic and universal appeal phone than ever before. Just same set of cameras, same aspect ratio, same features, just slightly more battery in both versions. Nobody's saying these phones are bad. They're just not making exciting strides the way they used to back in the day. Which brings us to this year's Samsung Galaxy S24. Even more boring colors and even more generic design and even more playing it safe than ever before. This year it's the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and this chip enables some pretty substantial AI features which they lean into. It makes the phones really good. Stuff like live translation and generative photo editing, call screening, and my personal favorite, Circle to Search, is awesome. But a lot of the AI features are now making their way to some other phones, and Circle to Search isn't an exclusive. The Pixel has that too. And frankly, aside from just getting flatter edges and slightly bigger batteries, they share a lot of parts with the previous year's phones, like the cameras, the screen resolutions. They bumped up a little bit, but functionally the same. Screen to body ratios, the same. Maybe the buttons are clickier. Maybe that's enough. These phones are all grown up now. So now we've seen the glow up, the different eras, the plastic to the glass, the iconic to the static. But my favorite way to visualize all these different types of improvements is the graphs. So welcome to my favorite section, the graph section. Now, before we jump fully in, a quick word from our channel sponsor, Dbrand. Fun fact, they've been supporting these devices since the Galaxy S4. That is a long time. Now, they're also supporting all the way up to Galaxy S24, and I think this year with these phones, a lot of us were expecting to get Qi 2 support, to get kind of like that ring of MagSafe style magnets, but for whatever reason, the stars didn't align, so this phone doesn't have that. But with Dbrand's cases for the S24 series, they all come with magnets built in. So that means basically any Qi 2 or MagSafe accessories will work on the S24. So they essentially give you that easy alignment on any wireless charger. Pretty sick. You can check it out at the link below in the description. So let's take a look at how far these phones have come. These are really interesting, and there's a couple of them. I think Samsung is the first one that has notable ups and downs in their progress graphs, which is really interesting. It kind of feels like they're going backwards, but there's reasons behind all of it. Also, this could be a way crazier graph because they obviously split out and fork into a bunch of different models, the Edge models, the Plus models, the Ultra models, the Active models, but I'm just sticking with just the base models, just for pure simplicity of visuals. So, first up, screen sizes. So these are the screen sizes of the base Samsung Galaxy S over every single year, starting at the original 4-inch Samsung Galaxy S, then really quickly jumping up into the 5s, and then kind of slowing down and settling in right around 6 inches. You can actually see a slight dip where the S10 was 6.1 inches, then it was 6.2 again, then back to 6.1 to make room for the Ultra, then back up to 6.2 again. Feels like now there's a sort of a dedicated gigantic phone, so this rate of growth has pretty much evened out. So the huge phone is the Ultra, which is 6.8 inches, which is crazy, but here's a fun fact. Based on this chart, maybe it's not a fact, but you can make an argument that the Galaxy S20 was kind of peak Samsung, because that is the same screen size as today's base phone. But hold that thought. Let's look now at battery sizes. So, battery life hasn't really improved dramatically. We're still at a day for a good phone, but the physical capacity of these batteries they're able to fit in these phones has improved significantly as well. So you can see it starts at 1500 milliamp hours, removable of course, then nearly doubles by the Galaxy S5, but then it dips right when they introduce the Edge phones. Then they shoot back up again, but again kind of flatlines in line with a certain memorable battery-related event. But then they eventually got the courage to walk back up the base phone all the way to 4000 milliamp hours. And what do you know? Again, you can argue Galaxy S20 is peak Samsung. That's the first year of the 4000 milliamp hour battery, and that is still the battery size again. Now, the primary camera megapixel count. This one's a little more interesting, maybe a little more classic improvement over time. Of course, megapixels don't mean everything, but it's fun to see the priorities increase over time. At the beginning, there was a lot of incentive to just level up from 720p to 1080p video and then to 4K video. But once we hit 8K, there's not any reason to go too crazy with megapixels beyond that. Of course, the highest end Ultra phones quickly blasted the ceiling way up all the way to 100 megapixels and then 200 this year, which is nuts. But for the baseline phone, most people's screens aren't 50 megapixels, so I think this is a very appropriate plateau. But then last but not least, starting price. We all know what happened with smartphones over the years, and here you can see it visualized. The steep climb through $400, $500, $600, right up to the $900 ceiling for the base Galaxy S. This is the base phone. Now, the most expensive phone has of course gotten dramatically more expensive too, so again, that ceiling lifting with the Ultra has allowed Samsung to go way up to $1,300 starting, and today you can pay $1,660 for the 1TB Galaxy S24 Ultra, but that has at least helped bump the base price back down a little bit to the $799 of today. So that's how we got from here to here, from Galaxy S1 to S24. These videos are super fun to sort of look back and actually visualize that progress over time. I also feel like I already know which one we want to do next. Get subscribed to make sure you see that coming up. Either way, thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace. From 2 gigs, I deserve that.